This is ESBR Boxing, and I'm delighted to be joined by the Lion, Elliot Stott. Elliot, thanks for joining me. This video obviously is dedicated to, well, it's a hypothetical fight, so to speak, between the potential fight between as Adam Azim and Dalton Smith, both super lightweight contenders from Britain. Dalton Smith, obviously the British champion at the minute, 14-0. Adam Azim currently 8-0. But both look like real prospects, particularly Azim, who's already headlining shows and stuff. So yeah, this video is just going to be a quick bit of content about who we think would win that fight if it happened next, maybe who would win it in the future if it was for a world title, say, and so on and so forth. So yeah, thanks for joining me, Elliot. What are your thoughts on, first and foremost, how both fighters looked in their last two fights? We saw Azim fight Santos Reyes not long ago, and then a week after that, at the weekend past there, we saw Dalton Smith make the second successful defense of his British title. So what did you make of those two performances and kind of comparing the two?
Hey mate, yeah, really interesting one. I think it's interesting that they both fought so close to each other, so it's really good time to make this comparison now. Both fighters were supposed to get an early stoppage in their last fight, and both went the distance. Not that's a bad thing. I think that it's a really interesting one to discuss. I think it's important to note at the same time, Dalton Smith is British champion. As you said, he made the second defense, is actually 26 years old. Adam Azim's 20. He's had a few more fights as well. So there are similarities, but there are also a lot of differences between these two fighters as well. However, that's not to say that this fight cannot happen in the future, but we'll have to see. I just think it's going to be interesting to see what paths they take. Adam Azim fought for some sort of WBA title in his last fight. Dalton Smith, as you said, is the British champion and is supposed to be fighting again very soon. Supposed to be fighting Sam Maxwell very soon in Sheffield. So it's going to be very interesting. But I do have both of them as future world champions, and they're fighting at the same weight, and obviously both British as well. So you'd think in the future this could be a massive pay-per-view fight. And in the past we've discussed who are the future pay-per-view stars in the UK, because there's no Amir Khan, Kell Brook anymore, and the likes of Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury might only have a handful of fights left. And so I think these two are the guys who you would think in the future could have these pay-per-view fights potentially. But yeah, there's a bit to unravel here, but yeah, just to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur. I think what you mentioned there about both being future world champions, I certainly agree with you. To be honest with you, I think in terms of pay-per-view stardom, Adam Azim's probably more likely to be a pay-per-view star, which is some people might find funny considering he's far less experienced than Dalton Smith. Obviously hasn't won a belt of note or anything as of yet. However, he's only 20. He's only had 8 fights, so he's got a bright future ahead of him. It's a fight I would love to see. I've said for a while now that Dalton Smith, it really impresses me. I'm a big fan, as I am of Adam Azim as well. A big fan, but yeah, hope the fight does happen. I don't think obviously it won't happen next or anything, but yeah, I just hope it happens in 2024, 2025, as you said. Imagine both were world champions and it was a unification. That would be absolute mega fight. My next question, Elliot, would kind of be, we touched on their two previous performances. You mentioned how both were expected to win by stoppage, but in fact, both fights went the distance. Out of the two fighters, I think some people think they both may have underperformed given what we were expecting. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Out of the two, who impressed you more? Did Azim's points victory over Reyes impress you more, or did Dalton Smith's unanimous decision win over Billy Allington impress you more if you had to compare the two?
Adam Azim impressed me more. I think to be 20 years old and in your eighth fight to go 10 rounds with a guy who's 12-0 isn't easy. That's not done very much. Most guys, when they're 20 and having their eighth fight, chances are they're fighting in a 6 rounder against someone who's not very good. So that impressed me more, and it makes you think. That's one of the things about Adam Azim. He is so young, and it makes you think, how good can he be in 2 or 3 years' time? Whereas Dalton Smith, he could be reaching his peak in a year's time or so, which I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. And I think we mentioned this in one of our previous videos. Billy Allington, no disrespect, is a Southern area English title level fighter. If Dalton Smith is a future world champion, he should be removing him in the first half of the fight, if not the first 3 rounds, in my opinion. So the fact that fight went the distance, credit to Wellington, but that's quite a surprise. So I'd say, yeah, Adam Azim definitely impressed me more. And it was more beneficial for Azim to get the rounds in because he's just been blowing guys out of there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, yeah, I can understand what you're saying. Dalton Smith, if he wins the British title again in his next fight, if he retains it, I think he wins it outright. As you mentioned, Sam Maxwell, a potential opponent there. Adam Azim, well, it's one of them where I think fans now, because he's already been made into this star and there's kind of such a hype train around him already, I think there's no going back now. He's fought the Ryland Chartons, even who that he fought in his seventh fight. A lot of people wouldn't be having that fight that early on. Like look at Florian Marku, he got dropped and stuff um
Mm.
by Ryland Charlton. So I think from now on Azim will have to, I think he has no other choice, but boxing fans will expect him to continue to make these steps towards world level already. Do you think that do you fear that a fight between these two would maybe never happen?
Yeah, that's a possibility. I don't look a fight with Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, I think is probably never going to happen. So I think here we are with that as well. Look, it depends on a lot. I think that there is the problem of having Matchroom's biggest star in a couple of years' time and Boxer's biggest star as well. What platform does that fight happen on? I think that's an issue. And yeah, I think, look, are they both? Is Adam Azim still going to be making 140 in 2 or 3 years' time? That's not guaranteed. So that's an issue as well. So we don't know. It's just, I think I try and stay positive about these things and say, yes, it will happen. And I think there's the other issue of kind of, I hate this word in boxing, but marinating, where I can't stand because marinate, like how long's Errol Spence and Terence Crawford been marinating for? I think that fight's kind of gone off, if you ask me. So I think that there's that question there as well. What level do you want these guys to get to? Should this fight happen for a British title? No, because these guys are both future world champions. But should it do you want to just leave it too long before one of these guys or both of them start to lose fights and the value of the fight goes down? There's that issue as well. So yeah, that's quite a long-winded answer. So I apologize, but that's how I see things. You want to wait the right amount of time so this can be a big, massive fight when it does happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm going to throw a curveball at you now. As you said, there's literally zero chance that this fight happens next. But for the sake of the video and reactions and stuff, I'm going to ask you, Elliot, if this fight were somehow to be made next summer of 2023, Dalton Smith
Mm.
against Adam Azim, who would you be putting your money on? Who do you think would win the fight?
I'm going to give you an answer here, and I would lean towards Dalton Smith just down to his experience. Adam Azim's fantastic, but I would lean towards Dalton Smith. However, if you said to me this fight will happen in 3 years' time, who would you lean towards? I would lean towards Adam Azim, just to be difficult. I just think at this time, Dalton Smith, look, he's gone the 12-round distance a couple of times. I believe he's faced better opposition. And Adam Azim, one thing about Adam Azim is he's not been in any sort of trouble yet. And I think that's what he needs. He needs someone who can punch him back, who can buzz him. He's going to need that at some point in his career. Otherwise, he's going to make that step up, and he's not going to be able to because he's never really been in any trouble before. And it's not necessarily his fault, but yeah, that's where I am. Where are you on the question?
Yeah, I would lean towards Dalton Smith as well. Just for basically all the reasons you mentioned. He's been in fights. Even not his last one, his one before the Arlington fight against Casey Benjamin. That was a close fight for a while. Casey Benjamin, was throwing back, having success on Dalton Smith. Dalton Smith showed that, he can take a shot. It didn't really bother him when there was a bit of adversity in the fight. He ended up still coming through. Obviously, this is a British level, so it remains to be seen if Smith can do that, at European or world level and beyond. But yeah, I don't. If the fight were to happen in 3 years' time, who would I lean towards? I honestly don't know. I have no idea. It really depends on again what you mentioned is where what does Adam Azim, how does Adam Azim react when he gets hit with a big shot? You know, when he gets shaken to his boots, which will eventually happen. You can't go through your boxing career and not get shaken to your boots. But an interesting comparison I'm going to make here, and you might think this is completely stupid, but you might see where my point here as well is, if I know the fight isn't going to happen next, but if it were to happen within the next year, it would kind of remind me of a Lawrence Okoli, Isaac Chamberlain fight, because both were undefeated at the time, both British, both were undefeated at the time, and obviously they fought each other. Okoli won a landslide more or less every round. The fight did not live up to what people's expectations were, but it was quite split.
Mm.
At the time, I know a lot of people were backing Isaac Chamberlain to win the fight. Obviously, Okoli won it convincingly, and look at Okoli now; he's arguably the best cruiserweight in the world. But I think at the time, both were British, both were in the same division, so everyone was automatically putting them against each other, which I suppose is what we're doing. But I suppose we're not what is what we're doing right now with Azim and Smith. So yeah, I kind of it's just a fight I do definitely want to see in the future. Whether that be, I mean, the likelihood of us seeing it before what 2028, if even. But I do hope it happens in the next 2 years. Just finally, Elliot, I know you mentioned there about who you think the fight would win the fight now. You mentioned both will be a future world champion. You said if it was 3 years' time, you potentially lean towards his aim. Is that your final prediction? If hypothetically
Yeah.
Adam Azim and Dalton Smith fought in the summer of 2026, 2026, so over 3 years' time, if the two were to fight on a big pay-per-view show, judging on what you've seen of them now, you would go with Adam Azim just because of the progression.
Yeah, I would, mate. That's my final prediction. It's just this could change because you don't know what's fascinating is for both guys is what happens over the next 12 months. So I know with Dalton Smith plan is to fight and hopefully beat Sam Maxwell in April, I believe. And then is he going to go down European level, going to world level? I don't know. Whereas Adam Azim's picked up this WBA belt. So does that mean he's going to try and work his way up those rankings and try and fight for a world title next year? Because if these guys are as good as we think they are, why can't they be fast tracked? So yeah, that's what's interesting to me. That, like, I've given you my answer. Would go for Adam Azim to win in 3 years' time, but how quickly these guys progress in the next 12 months or less is really going to be fascinating.
For the sake of argument, I'll disagree and say I would back Dalton Smith still to win, but that's maybe a slightly tinted glasses on, with Dalton Smith tinted glasses on, because I'm a big fan, as I've mentioned. But yeah, we could discuss this. We could discuss this for a long time, Elliot. I suppose there'd be so many different opinions and back and forth, but there's no point doing that today. But listen, mate, thanks very much for your time and jumping on and give me your views on a potential fight between Adam Azim and Dalton Smith.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. Speak to you soon.
Yes, mate.